Hey guys, John with presailing.com here, and today I'm going to talk about the Bartlett Method. Yes, this is named after me. I'm the guy that came up with this, but it's really interesting that this hasn't been done before, so it's a good application of a few advanced acquisition methods into one so that you can end up actually buying for negative down payment. So I've done this before. It's worked out phenomenally well. And really the reason why we don't do it more often is because I need more skilled partners to work with, which is why I make all this content for free so that you can become skilled and then we can end up buying a bunch of stuff together and splitting the workload so everybody has a good time. So without further ado, let me go ahead and get into it here. Quick disclaimer, by the way, this is not financial or legal advice, but it's pretty freaking sweet and it's made me a ton of money. I'm also not a CPA and I'm not a CFA, so chartered financial analyst, and I'm not an attorney. But I've consulted CPAs, I've managed $7 billion of money, and I have beaten a lot of attorneys. So, and I'm also not a gazillionaire guru, but I've bought 10 million plus in 2 years for no money. And I've also taught a lot of other people how to do the same thing for free. So, again, mostly just legal disclaimers on there. All right, foundational concepts. So, we're going to talk through a few of these things here first to make sure that you understand the building blocks of what we're going to be throwing into here. So, contingent contracts would be a signed contract that could only be enforced if certain actions actually end up happening, right? So it'd be saying this contract only is effective if XYZ happens on maybe a different contract. Guarantees would be if a guarantor is taking out a loan, they are liable. So that's typically when you buy with a bank, you're going to end up being a personal guarantor, which means you are personally liable for that loan, not just the property, which is called non-recourse lending, if it's just tied to the property. But if it's tied to you personally, then it's a personal guarantee. And if it's tied to an LLC or corporation, then it'll be a corporate guarantee. So what that means is that if you don't pay that loan, then they can go after and sue for damages against the person or against the company. And if there's neither of those, they just go against the collateral. Okay, price versus loan is a good concept to understand here too, because you can buy a 100K house and then a lender could do a 120K loan against it. It just depends on how it's structured, right? So just because you buy something for 100K does not mean that necessarily you can't take out over 100% debt on that property. Now, most lenders won't ever say yes to that, of course, but it is possible that if a lender said they'd be willing to do it, that you could in fact do it. And then there's seller financing. So a seller is going to be holding a loan against the property. So if you don't pay it, then they just foreclose on you, basically. So it's the same as if you were to have a bank hold the mortgage, or technically be like being the note holder. But the bank is the person you have to make sure you pay the loan back to, otherwise they have the ability to foreclose on you. Seller carry is also another terminology very similar to seller financing, but seller carry is typically used in the context of when the bank is in first position as the first lender, and then the seller is the second lender. An example of a first and a second would be a HELOC. So your first position lender would be a normal bank, but then a HELOC, a home equity line of credit, would be an example of the second mortgage that goes on there afterwards. So they're safe as long as you don't exceed 100% typically. And if you do, then that's what we talk about here and where this makes sense. Also, if a foreclosure auction were to happen, again, first position gets paid first, second gets paid second, etc. So that's where it's good to make sure that this is an all-around safe deal for everybody. So a seller in second position would just want to evaluate, is this going to make sense for me? DSCR is debt service coverage ratio. So this is going to be taking your annual net income that the property is having net income. So that means any property related income or property related expense. This is not the same as somebody jumping on their private plane to go fly to their property. That is not a property related expense. Additionally, you having debt on the property and paying interest isn't actually really a property specific expense that would get counted in your NOI. So the interest on a property would not be included in that net income equation. However, your principal plus interest payments would be counted for in your annual debt payments. So under your annual debt payments, that's going to be, let's just say if it was $1,000 a month for your annual debt, $10,000 a year, just to make it easy, for your annual debt payments, and your net income was $20,000 a year, then you'd have a 2.0 DSCR, saying that you are basically having positive cash flow. So 1.25 is the typical requirement, 1.0, 1.1, every lender has a little different criteria, but 1.25 is pretty typical. That basically means that you have to be making 25% more net than you are paying in debt, essentially. And if you hear the term global DSCR, that means it's DSCR for multiple properties or transactions. It just depends on the context, but typically it just means everything factored in would be your global. Okay, here's a fun one. Mortgage fraud. So fraud is an by the way, again, I'm not an attorney, that's why I put the liabilities at the beginning. So fraud is any activity that relies on direct or indirect deception in order to achieve a gain. This is typically in a financial context, particularly if it's mortgage fraud, and it's a federal felony offense. So it's not even state level; it's like federal level. It's a felony offense. It can get you up to 30 years in prison and $1 million in fines. So as of the date of this recording, which is November in 2025. Again, not an attorney, but so don't sue me if I'm slightly off on that number, but point is, it's not good. Don't do mortgage fraud. And if you ever get that on your record, and let's just say you get off the charge or whatever, the fact you've been accused of mortgage fraud, it means you're basically never going to work in real estate or any business basically ever again. Like you're basically totally screwed. So not only is it unethical, but it's also a literal crime of a felony degree, up to 30 years in prison. So it's not worth it. Not disclosing all relevant information to lenders can lead to whether you know it or not, you can end up committing mortgage fraud if you are not careful. So you make sure that you disclose all relevant information to everybody, particularly the lender, so that you don't commit mortgage fraud. Morby Method relies on a buyer committing mortgage fraud, like a schmuck, just to do the deal. So Morby Method is incredibly dangerous. It is possible to do it the right way. If you have everybody just throw caution to the wind on the lender side, then it is possible to do it correctly. But like 98% of the time, it's mortgage fraud that's happening. It's just not being called out, and it's not actually being, caught / convicted. So just because you're not getting caught doing something that is a crime, doesn't mean that it's okay to do it. So do your research into Morby Method if you have more questions on why it's mortgage fraud, but I'm just going to leave it there. It's basically you're being deceitful to the lender, whether it's direct or indirect, and as a result, it's actually a felony offense at the federal level. So most aren't caught, and then most just trust big baller gurus that say, hey, this is okay to do it. So be very careful with Morby Method. Now we're going to talk about Bartlett Method, which is obviously, as you'd expect, my favorite method because I'm Jon Bartlett. So here's an example. Let me walk you through it, and you'll see why this is so powerful and how you can do it for negative down and you're doing everything correctly. But if you didn't already understand the previous concepts, I would encourage that you go back and rewatch that section of the video. So without further ado, let me go ahead and jump into the Bartlett Method. So you're buying 20 homes for 2.0 million. And I'm going to do everything expressed in millions because it's a little easier. So we're going to divide properties up into two buckets. Bucket A is going to have a global DSCR, which means the bank plus the seller financing we're going to do on it of 1.25 or higher. And all homes are appraised and also are bankable, which means that they're worth, doing with a bank essentially. A bank's not going to have an issue with the properties, and they don't have an issue with the global DSCR. So 10 homes would be approximately $1 million, right? We're just going to call it it's 2 million for 20 homes. So therefore it's 100K per home. So it's 10 homes on the left side there. That's $1 million. We're going to have our bank in first position at 70% loan to value. You could do 75, 65, whatever. I'm just demonstrating the concept here. And that would be on a personal guarantee. So they're going to say you are personally liable for that. And that's very, very common. The bank is going to say you're personally liable for this. Now, your seller is going to be in second position and they will carry 20. So this is a 70, 20, 10 transaction is what it's commonly referred to. The property would be collateral for the seller because in seller financing, it is like basically never going to be personally guaranteed. That's just like never going to really happen. And then your down payment is going to be 100K, so 0.1 million in this case. That's on bucket A on the left side. Bucket B on the right side, you're going to have your global DSCR for bucket A and bucket B will have to pencil out to 1.25 or higher, and you will not need an appraisal or bankability required on this side of the bucket or on this side of the transaction. This is contingent on everything in bucket A closing. So this isn't just like we're going to only close bucket B, but not bucket A. You have to close both buckets. Otherwise, it's risky for the seller because you could get a very good deal on bucket B, basically. So you're going to buy 10 homes for $1 million. And by the way, I just want to highlight on the left side there, that's 10% down, right? So that we did 10% down on the left side. So now bucket B is where the magic happens, and why it's a good deal for both buyer and seller, because we actually end up getting this sold at 2 million when maybe otherwise it's only 1.7. So the seller would be carrying 100%, or they're financing 100% at 1 million. The property would be collateral, and the seller would also take a second position note for 200K, which would be 0.2 million, with a corporate guarantee. Now, you don't actually have to do a corporate guarantee on that. You could just say, hey, it's also collateralized against the 10 homes. So you could just say it's a $1.2 million loan against $1 million sale. That is okay to do. Remember the analogy earlier that we were talking about? You could do a 120K loan against a property that you buy for 100. That's okay to do. But the reason why I include the corporate guarantee is I don't want people pitching this method to sellers wrong and then putting the sellers in a risky spot. So by giving them a corporate guarantee, it makes it very safe. Because what you're doing is you're buying 10 homes for $1 million, and then you owe $1 million on the homes. So if you don't pay, then fine, they get the homes back, right? No real risk to either side of the party, assuming that you didn't do something crazy with like the home valuation or whatever. But otherwise, the seller is on the right side. They're going to do a second position on their own property, and they'll be doing a corporate guarantee. What this works out to is that you actually end up getting, at closing on bucket B, you will end up getting 200K, right? So it's a negative down payment on bucket B. So what you want to do is you want to have your bucket A down payment be something small enough, like 10%-ish, and on the right side, you want to skew it so it's actually a little bit more than what you would actually be needing to close. So the result is the bank is happy, because you can tell the bank about this entire thing, and most banks will be like, yeah, that makes sense because it doesn't violate any loan conditions and you're not committing any mortgage fraud because you're telling them everything. And the bank's very happy because they're in first position on bucket A. And then there's also a global DSCR ratio for bucket A and B that is 1.25. The bank is also informed, of course, so there's no weird issues there. And then the seller will end up getting a 2 million sales price, right? Get 2 million up here. And they carry 1.4 because they say, here's your second position over here, which is 200K. You got your first position over here, which is $1 million. And then you got your second position here, which is 200K. So that's a total of 1.4 million. So what's 2 million minus 1.4 means 0.6. So the seller will get 0.6, which would be 30% down. In this case, again, you can skew it slightly different ways to make it 20% down versus 40% down. It's up to you. The buyer is going to do a corporate guarantee on all of bucket B's, or the seller portion here on bucket B, which is the second position one. And by them doing a corporate guarantee on here, it gives the seller protection over everything. Because what seller in their right mind would cut you a check to buy their property unless they have some kind of way to get that money back if they need to? So you're doing a corporate guarantee over bucket A. And what that does is it ostensibly puts the seller in kind of like a second or third position over here, but not really. It's not an actual legitimate lien. And it's also okay because you're allowed to do corporate guarantees as long as you're informing the bank of what you're doing and you're not buying something simultaneously with bucket A. You got to make sure that if you're buying something off to the side that you let the bank know. And if you show them all the numbers and say, hey, I'm buying this stuff here and that works and it doesn't make it look risky, like you're not going to hemorrhage money on bucket B, then they don't care because they're like, it's fine. You know, you go do other business decisions. You don't have to run everything through the bank. But you do have to run everything from the bank if you're involving the bank, right? i.e. on bucket A. Everything on bucket A, you absolutely have to run through them with. But bucket B, it's really, really smart that you advise them on what you're doing over on the side. And if you don't, then it might be, they might look at it really weird. It's not really going to be mortgage fraud, most likely, if you don't disclose bucket B, but it just doesn't look honest, and the bank's going to not really understand what the hell is going on. So if that happens, then the bank's going to be like, this seems like a better deal than I could think of, and therefore I'm jealous, and I wish I was doing this more often. So I get that kind of feedback from lenders every now and then, as they wish that they had basically they're doing the deal instead of lending on the deal. So don't make them jealous on it, but it's a really good deal for the bank. Also, you can, on the left side for bucket A, just depending on how you do the paperwork on it, if you wanted to, you can just either come out of pocket for a second, or you can just use a transactional lender. But really, if you're closing these at the same time, then and you're closing with the same escrow company, it doesn't matter. And from the bank's point of view on bucket A, that is your cash because it's the equivalent as if you said, so bucket B is the equivalent of saying, hey, I just sold a property today. Can I use those cash proceeds towards bucket A? They're like, yeah, sure, whatever. right? But instead of you selling a property and getting cash, it's actually you buying a property and getting cash, in which case, again, it's still skin in the game. It's still legitimately your cash. But if they needed like proof of funds or something in order to like make bucket A work, again, I think showing them the second bucket, bucket B, is smart, because you can show them, hey, here's how I'm structuring this so that I end up making, so they end up contributing legitimate capital into the deal, because you're a corporate guarantee on it. But as you know, if you're taking out a loan at the same time as doing a mortgage, it can be misconstrued or potentially correctly construed as you essentially being dishonest. So make sure that you show them as much as you possibly can. But at the end of the day, their regulation for the bank is only really going to apply to bucket A, in which case the bank is happy because you're doing 10% down. So yeah, that is the Bartlett method. It's a little bit complex, but it's actually not too bad when you look at it. Is you just got to figure out which properties you want to put in bucket A or in bucket B. Also, information is one thing, but application is everything. So if you enjoyed this content, we have free weekly meetings in the Discord. I go through whether I talk about the deals I've done or Q&A, or we have other events. We do live calling. We do all sorts of stuff. So go ahead and join the community Discord. There's a QR if you are on desktop, and scan it with your phone. Otherwise, you can go over to preselling.com, and that will have all the links to everything you need. If you have not learned anything or thought about anything differently, then your parents love you for being teachable, your significant other loves you for being a very good listener, and then your kids must love you because you don't feel like you need to make any more money. Otherwise, you need to pay me. Here's how you can pay me. 40 seconds of positive feedback, 40 seconds of negative feedback. You can send this video to somebody that's going to probably end up being your future business partner if they find this interesting. You can subscribe, and then also we'll be doing exclusive resource alerts. And join the community for all the aforementioned stuff, like all the events that we do. Pretty much anybody you talk to within the community will tell you it's like that's the best community out there, because I really do put a lot of time into making sure that you can go out and close, and I'm legitimately doing it for free. Because when you go out and you go close 100 units and you're like, damn, that guy wasn't kidding, you're probably going to say, hey, John, can we go close 100 units together? And then I'm like, great, I already have somebody to work with that's totally competent and knows what they're doing. Let's go do it together. And it's not going to be like a, hey, give me money type of thing. You could also just send me $15,000 at the course if you want. I'm just kidding. Everything's free. Go to the QR code or go to the website. So preselling.com, and that's a wrap. So hopefully you found this content very enjoyable. Again, do send it to the right person that is going to benefit from this, because it is a ridiculously good strategy. And I probably should have predicated on this as well. I've done this strategy and it's awesome. That's why it's called the Bartlett Method. This isn't a theory. This has actually worked. And the bank is like, that's really cool. I am totally fine to do that. So definitely give it a spin. It is one of the best ones out there. All right. Thanks, y'all.